Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, reports of an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability in OpenSSH. Also, new Microsoft Teams plugin becomes available that will make Teams in VDI a more workable solution. And recently, a Goldman Sachs analyst referred to the current buzz in generative AI as a potential bubble. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, and MDM to remove local admin rights, manage lockdown applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And for the first week ever, I'm really excited to announce that the podcast has a new awesome sponsor. And that is, of course, Master Packager, which is a product and a team that I've been fond of for a number of years. And if you're a regular listener to this podcast, then you'll already be familiar with Master Packager because I've talked about some of their products and features over the years. But Master Packager is an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. So if you enjoy this podcast, as always, say thank you to my sponsors. And now for some news. Ars Technica recently reported on a vulnerability listed as CVE-2024-6387, which allows unauthenticated remote code execution with root system rights on Linux systems that are based on glibc, an open source implementation of the C standard library. The vulnerability is the result of a code regression introduced in 2020 that reintroduced CVE-2006-5051, a vulnerability that was fixed back in 2006. It's possible thousands, if not millions, of vulnerable servers are on the internet that are at risk from this current vulnerability. The flaws reported stem from faulty management of the signal handler, a component in glibc for responding to potentially serious events such as division by zero attempts. When a client device initiates a connection but doesn't successfully authenticate itself within an allotted time, vulnerable OpenSSH systems call what's known as SIGL-RM handler asynchronously. The flaw resides in SSHD, the main OpenSSH engine. Qualysys has named the vulnerability RegreSSHion, as in RegreSSHion, a clever little pun. While this poses a serious threat as OpenSSH is ubiquitous with enterprise networks, researchers have suggested mass exploitation of the vulnerability is unlikely due to some of the factors around it. That includes the fact the attack can take as long as 8 hours to complete and requires as many as 10,000 authentication steps due to protections around address space layout randomization, which changes the memory addresses where executable code is stored in order to thwart attempts to run malicious payloads. Also, attackers must know the specific OS running on each targeted server. So far, no one has found a way to exploit 64-bit systems since the number of available memory addresses is exponentially higher than those available on 32-bit systems. The vulnerability is reported to affect OpenSSH versions earlier than 4.4 P1, versions from 4.4 P1 up to but not including 8.5 P1 are not vulnerable due to a transformative patch for CVE-2006-5051. The vulnerability resurfaces in versions from 8.5 P1 up to but not including 9.8 P1 due to the accidental removal of the critical component in a function, thus how this is a regression vulnerability. It's being reintroduced. Anyone running a vulnerable version should update as soon as possible. SiliconRepublic.com has reported that Twilio has asked users of its two-factor authentication app Authy to update to the latest Android or iOS version for security following a hack that may have stolen millions of phone numbers. In a recent update, Twilio said it had detected threat actors who were able to identify data associated with Authy accounts, including phone numbers, due to an unauthenticated endpoint. They said, quote, "We have taken action to secure this endpoint and no longer allow unauthenticated requests. We have seen no evidence that the threat actors obtained access to Twilio's systems or other sensitive data. While Authy accounts are not compromised, threat actors may try to use the phone number associated with Authy accounts for phishing and smishing attacks. We encourage all Authy users to stay diligent and have heightened awareness around the text they are receiving," end quote. This comes after a person or a group called Shiny Hunters published a list of 33 million phone numbers from Authy on the dark web. So if you do happen to use Authy, make sure you're on the latest version. And it seems like some data is out there in the hands of the bad guys, unfortunately. So if the phone numbers you've used with Authy are also used in anything sensitive, you may want to consider taking some extra steps to enhance your security and protect yourself. Cloudflare addressed a recent degradation of service that occurred on June 27th that affected 300 networks in 70 countries. It has been suggested the problems with requests being rejected by Cloudflare was down to a mix of a leak and hijacking of border gateway protocol traffic. They said Cloudflare started announcing the 1.1.1.1/32 IP addresses to its peers and upstream providers. This incorrect announcement was accepted by multiple networks, including a Tier 1 provider, which treated it as a remote-triggered black hole route. The hijack occurred because BGP routing favors the most specific route. It said AS267613's announcement of the 1.1.1.1/32 was more specific than that of Cloudflare's, leading networks to incorrectly route traffic to that AS267613. Consequently, traffic intended for Cloudflare's 1.1.1.1 DNS resolver was black-holed and rejected. Hence, the service became unavailable for some users. About a minute later, Nova Rede de Telecomunicações, which seemed to own this AS262504 that essentially took over the 1.1.1.1, erroneously leaked upstreams to AS1031, which then propagated it further, that led to it affecting global routing. Of course, it's significant whenever Cloudflare suffers an outage, as we've seen in the past, because so much of the major sites and services on the internet actually rely on Cloudflare for the CDN. I believe it's around 20% of all internet services and sites rely on it. So this could have been really bad, but luckily, in this case, it seems to have had a relatively low impact. For racing fans, this next story is probably already known due to some of the drama it has caused in the sport, but the FIA, which is the governing body of Formula One or F1, disclosed a breach stating, quote, "Recent incidents pursuant to phishing attacks has led to the unauthorized access to personal data contained in 2 email accounts belonging to the FIA. The FIA took all actions to rectify the issues, notably in cutting the illegitimate accesses in a very short time once it became aware of the incidents," end quote. So the news of email accounts being breached comes just weeks after a controversial email leak suggested a potential sabotage of one of the most prolific drivers in Formula One. Whilst it appears this may not be connected, at least from reviewing multiple sources covering this breach and this story, the fact that there was a breach like this and it's related to 2 email accounts, and there was this previously high-profile email leak related news story before, seems awfully coincidental. It'd be interesting to see if the 2 cases get connected further down the line, but at this moment in time, this is just me connecting dots that aren't there. But still, the main crux of this story that is relevant is that a major sport and racing governing body, the FIA over Formula One, has disclosed a breach. Pedro Jose Piera Vito publicly noted last week that the OpenAI ChatGPT app that was just released on macOS recently was not sandboxed and stored all conversations in plain text in a non-protected location, meaning any other app, process, or malware could read all of your ChatGPT conversations without you receiving any permission prompt or indication that it was occurring. It appears now that OpenAI reacted to this rather quickly, as they have updated the app and the local chats are now encrypted. Though they are still not being sandboxed, they are at least encrypted now. It's interesting that OpenAI has opted not to use the sandbox feature, which seems to have been pushed as becoming a standard for macOS. I wonder if this is going to be something that changes, considering the recent announcement that Apple and OpenAI would be working together on some close integrations within their future operating system feature releases. But way to go, Pedro, for highlighting this, because it seems to have got reacted to pretty quickly. Another worrying case of unencrypted data from an AI service not long after Microsoft's controversy with their recall feature, which, to be fair, Microsoft also reacted very quickly to the negative feedback on that and made some changes there. The Epic Game Store app for EU iPhones has passed Apple's notarization process, putting the alternative App Store a step closer to selling apps directly to iOS users outside of the App Store. While Apple has confirmed that the app has passed, it has asked Epic to fix some buttons in a future submission to the company's app review process. But the approval is just temporary, according to Epic CEO Tim Sweeney, who puts Apple's request differently. He says that Apple is demanding they change the buttons in the next version, vowing that the company will fight this. According to The Verge, the apparently conditional approval is just the latest part of the back and forth saga between Apple and Epic. And to be fair, again, if Apple is pushing back saying you need to change certain buttons, like I don't know what it is specifically they're asking and why to change those buttons, but considering how Apple tends to maliciously comply with regulations, my guess is that they are being difficult with these buttons, and this is not Epic complaining just for the sake of complaining, and they should just go along with it because Apple knows best and they should have some level of control. My guess is Apple's just trying to be a little crappy with this, but hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe more information will come out on exactly why they've issued this request to change the buttons. Hackers have leaked what they claim is Ticketmaster barcode data for 166,000 Taylor Swift era tour tickets, warning that more events would be leaked if a $2 million extortion demand is not paid. Their demand states, quote, "Pay us $2 million or we leak all 680 million of your users' information and 30 million more event barcodes, including more Taylor Swift events, Pink, Sting, sporting events like Formula One racing, Major League Baseball, NFL, and thousands more events," end quote. So I wonder what that implication would be. Obviously, if they're leaking barcodes, perhaps someone could just grab one of the leaked barcodes and try to show up at like a Taylor Swift concert or something like that and use that wrong barcode, or, well, use that legitimate barcode that they didn't actually pay for. So potentially they could be sitting in someone else's seat. But I would imagine Ticketmaster could just reissue all the tickets for these events that might be affected and just produce new barcodes for everyone. So I'm not sure if this is something that is worth paying a ransom over, but maybe there's more to it, and I'm just taking a too simplistic a view of it. Microsoft recently announced Windows 365 Cross-Region Disaster Recovery, which is a Windows 365 add-on feature that creates snapshots of cloud PCs. These snapshots are then placed in customer-defined geographically distant locations, and they can be recovered to cloud PCs running in the selected location during a disaster recovery event. Much like other Windows 365 features, a selling point of this feature is the simplicity when it comes to both enabling it and using it if required. They state that the Windows 365 Cross-Region Disaster Recovery feature is provided as an add-on license to Windows 365 Enterprise SKUs only. So if you're using the business SKU, this is something that you're not going to be able to avail of. In the US, pricing for the Windows 365 cross-region disaster recovery add-on is $5 per user per month, and it can be applied to the enterprise cloud PCs that the user is licensed to use. If you would like to purchase this, you have to contact sales for pricing in other regions to get that specific pricing. All they've listed is the US one on this article. Microsoft also recently announced a public preview of a new optimization architecture that brings closer alignment between physical and virtual desktops in terms of Microsoft Teams. They say that they've re-architected Teams in VDI from the ground up, explaining Teams now delivers a new media engine that replaces WebRTC called SlimCore. And this will allow parity between the native app and the VDI teams. While not all new features can come day one to VDI, according to the announcement, they say they are no longer limited to what WebRTC supports, hence feature gaps can be closed quicker. Microsoft claims the same quality and reliability you experience in native Teams clients for Windows is now enabled for VDI. And with this, they are reducing time to join a meeting and call drops, higher success rate when creating or joining a meeting or screen sharing, latest codecs, and more. As part of the re-architecture, there's a new client-side plugin, which is the MS Teams plugin. And this is responsible for the virtual channel establishment with Teams on the server, and subsequently for media engine downloading. Remote desktop clients for Windows version 1.2.5405 or Windows App 1.3.252 and higher are bundling this plugin already. Just upgrade to those versions and you're ready to go. And by enabling auto update on the RD client or Windows app, you'll guarantee you'll always have the latest plugin. They said the Citrix Workspace app for Windows 2402 can present a UI to the user for an opt-in installation. Citrix admins can also deploy the plugin with an MSI installer out of band on top of their Citrix Workspace app higher than version 2203 LTSR or 2302 current release. Global App Config Service is also a viable option for plugin deployments. The deployment of the plugin is envisioned to be a one-time thing, and they have limited the amount of code and logic on it so that they can avoid asking customers to constantly upgrade it. So yeah, in the case of Citrix, it is possible to get this MSI to deploy to update to that plugin, but then hopefully once you've updated, it'll just be part of the ongoing updates going forward. You won't need this separate installer, I guess. And once a plugin makes it to the client, Teams will send instructions for the specific media engine version that it needs, and the plugin will do the rest. It will contact Microsoft's public CDN, download an MSIX package, and automatically stage or register it on the user's device. No reboots or admin privileges required. And whenever you upgrade Teams on the server, a new media engine version will be deployed on the client. No more upgrades required on your VDI stack. Plugins are backward and forward compatible with SlimCore versions, and plugins will clean up unused or obsolete SlimCore versions as well. The public preview applies currently to Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop, and Citrix DAS. So it's interesting to see the way they're going to use MSIX over a CDN. This is one of the value adds that Microsoft had first announced at Microsoft Build in 2018 related to MSIX, and the ability to handle seamless application updates and not requiring reboots or anything like that, anything you currently experience with traditional installs. So this seems like a really good use case to flex the muscle of MSIX and show its value. So hopefully, Microsoft's going to develop MSIX further in the future, and things look pretty good if Microsoft's internal teams are seeing value and leveraging it for that value. In a pretty shrewd move, Cloudflare has announced a new tool that blocks all AI bots from scraping a site's text. Cloudflare says the tool is available to all customers, even those on the free tier. In the announcement, Cloudflare suggested AI bots accessed around 39% of the top 1 million internet properties. For the Cloudflare customers, enabling the setting is simple. You just go to the settings section of your dashboard, click Security and Bots, and from there you'll see a toggle button labeled AI Scrapers and Crawlers. Turn it on and AI bots will no longer have access to your content. And obviously this is a pretty significant step, as I stated before, over 20% of the sites and services on the internet use Cloudflare. So a significant number of major sites could potentially turn this on and prevent bots from scraping their data. And that's obviously something that's very important to these AI services as they scrape this data to feed their large language models that keep their services going. So it'll be interesting to see if this has any impact. And of course, I guess if it's going to have an impact, it would be on like future works and future creations and future blog posts, articles, how-tos, KBs, because the past stuff is likely already scraped and in those large language models. But it would be interesting to see if more recent or current or future data is less likely to end up in these large language models. And speaking of AI and interesting stories related to AI, recently Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa said that while AI does have value, Nintendo will not be using it for their game development, saying that generative AI, which has been a hot topic in recent years, can be more creative, but we also recognize that it has issues with intellectual property rights. Our company has decades of know-how in creating optimal gaming experiences for our customers. While we are flexible in responding to technological developments, we hope to continue to deliver value that is unique to us and cannot be created through technology alone. End quote. So that is really, really interesting because it touches on two things. It touches on not wanting to leverage AI and risk developers inputting in code or entire intellectual property and works from Nintendo into systems that then basically leverage that and make it part of their data set and potentially affects patented and trademarked works from Nintendo. But not only that, as stated, they want to deliver work that is unique to them and work that cannot be created through technology alone, which I think also touches on the fact that, I think customers will be able to tell when there's human touch involved in terms of like artworks and a lot of the aspects of creativity that goes into games. So it's interesting to see Nintendo taking this stance. Interestingly, recently Goldman Sachs published an article by analyst Jim Covello in which he calls AI a bubble, warning that investor sentiment on AI stocks could turn negative. He warned that there will be over $1 trillion invested in AI in the coming years, but questions the ability for an immediate return on investment. Covello argues that to earn an adequate return on the $1 trillion estimated cost of developing and running AI technology, it must be able to solve complex problems, but he says it isn't built to do so. He points out that truly life-changing inventions like the internet enabled low-cost solutions to disrupt high-cost solutions even in its infancy, unlike costly AI tech today. Covello is skeptical that AI's costs will ever decline enough to make automating a large share of tasks affordable, given the high starting point as well as the complexity of building critical inputs like GPU chips, which may prevent competition. He's also doubtful that AI will boost the valuation of companies that use the tech, as any efficiency gains would likely be competed away. Also, the path to actually boosting revenues is unclear in his view, and he questions whether models trained on historical data will ever be able to replicate humans' most valuable capabilities. While I don't know about all of that, I would echo some of the sentiments in there around the possibility that sentiment could turn negative. I don't know about investor sentiment because I think those with money and those who employ a lot of people will see a lot of potential in AI in reducing their overhead and improving efficiencies in their organizations. I feel where sentiment may turn negative is actually just on the consumer side, kind of like Nintendo had alluded to. It's not just technology alone that creates the works that are really loved by people like Nintendo games. PlayStation, Xbox games, PC games, they've become so high-end and just impressive in terms of graphics, but nothing will beat a Nintendo game for fun. There's a lot to be said for just kind of unique creations from people, and AI can generate cool stuff, but to get some really cool stuff out of AI, you have to input parameters and tell it to use a certain style, which is a style that AI did not create, a human created. So in order for there to be future styles and future trends and all that, you kind of need humans to be that input source. So in my recent session around AI, one of the things that I warned about was, well, if you keep messing around with people, the consumers, they're probably going to turn negative against AI if it's being used ineffectively. I could share a link again if anyone wants to hear my session around it. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on AI, but opinions are like a-holes. Everyone's got one, and I shared mine if you want to hear it at length. But that's it for the news. Now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, the awesome Jen Gentleman shared a really useful tip to know. Did you know when using Alt+Tab to bring up like multiple windows that you've got open and being able to toggle through them, if you hit delete, it will close the window that you're focused on. So pretty cool. The guys over at GoEUC have published a new analysis of Citrix Codecs showing quality analysis of H.264, H.265, and AV1. So if you want to see how those codecs measure up against each other, check out their great work. And finally, Shreyan Fernandes shared a pretty good blog post on a Visual Studio AI Toolkit. So if you're interested in actually developing using the AI Toolkit, check out this blog post to get started. So I really hate publishing episodes early in the week because I like to keep to a regular cadence. And when I do an early week episode, if I try to go back into my regular cadence of like a Thursday or a Friday, it means there's more news to cover the next week and it takes longer to produce the episode. But regardless, I have to travel this week, so this is going to be an early week episode. I think isn't Patch Tuesday this Tuesday. So I may get another episode out early next week just to kind of break things up because I assume there's going to be some patch related news. But yeah, if you're a regular listener, I apologize that this episode's much earlier than usual, and I hope to return to the regular cadence, if not next week, the week after. But hey, as always, thank you so much for listening.